us versus them. Now, the us, for many of us in the room, has always been the West and Western liberal democracy. But none of our speakers this morning are Western. None grew up in a liberal democracy. We have China, Russia, and the Middle East, aka Gotham City, represented. Western democracy is ill. And I'm going to start with you, Nathan, this morning. You and your fellow protesters in Hong Kong are fighting for the rights of democratic freedoms, while in the West we're struggling with our own democracies. What is the us and the them for you?
I can tell that from my personal story. The worst form of this kind of we and them or identifying people unlike you is to stir hatred among people, is to use misinformation campaign to create conflict among people. And that's what China has been doing. They use the nationalism in China, which has always been one of the most powerful weapons for the Chinese Communist regime, to go against a protest that is fighting for democracy and autonomy. And you can see from the 5 demands that protesters have been insisting that none of them is about fighting for independence. None of them is fighting for separatism of Hong Kong. But China, by framing in that way, they undermine the legitimate demand of Hong Kong people.
Let me go to Kassem. I almost didn't recognize you. What's with the mask?
I really think it's funny that politicians get to ban masks while they get to wear them almost every day. Greedy CEOs, lying politicians, hypocrite journalists who go out and talk about things that they actually have no clue about. They get to wear their masks, but we don't.
So, Kassem, we want to hear more about your story. In 2011, you were kind of doing what Nathan is doing now. You were fighting for democracy, standing up for democracy in your own country, in Syria.
We had an uprising. A lot of people, self-included, we've been living for tyranny for more than 40 years. My only dream, and everyone's dream, was actually to leave Syria, to get away from this big prison without walls. But in 2011, our dreams changed. During the Arab Spring, instead of all thinking about how we should leave the Middle East, how we should leave the Arab world and run to Europe or run to America, we actually just wanted to stay home and make our countries a better place for everyone. We stood up in the streets and we started chanting for freedom, for democracy. We've been asking for the West to protect us. They didn't. I lived for more than 2 years under siege and bombardment by my own government, but I decided to stay and defend my country.
You fought on the side of democracy, but democracy let you down. And then you fled your country because you had to in the end, after surviving barely a sarin gas attack. You came to Germany, a liberal democracy where you now have refugee status. And it was us versus them all over again.
I left, I came to Germany, and only to be surprised first by the kindness of the German people and the great efforts by the German government to help hundreds of thousands of people. But in the same time, I ended up living in a place where Nazis are literally on the rise.
Sergey, I want to come to you. You know, the West has led these, seems to be unable to support these pro-democracy activists in various parts of the world. The West seems to be unable to create or to deliver on its promise of a multi-ethnic democracy. Is liberalism failing? Is Western democracy on its way out?
I think that democracy, the liberal democracy in this way it has developed during the last 30 years is not survivable. Very simple, because it runs against the basic instincts and the basic value of the mankind. I have had this ideology of communism, which was even more beautiful than liberal ideology. Equality to all, overcoming states, overcoming nationalities, being governed not by the world government, but even by something more beautiful like proletarian international. I mean, it died ignominiously because it was inhuman. It did not correspond to the normal values of the man or of the woman, of the humanity. So liberal democracy in this sense, which it is here, of course it is doomed, but democracy will survive.
Is the true us versus them not Russia versus the
Well,
West? And aren't you actively trying to bring that about? It's not just the West bringing that upon itself. You are actively trying to disrupt our democracies.
Listen, I mean, when I hear that we are trying to, interfere, it's bizarre or kinky. Of course, I mean, I wish we had had more of a success there, because we had to teach our Western neighbors not to interfere and not to throw stones in living in crystal palaces.
But Sergey, you know, your government is supporting national populists across Europe.
Populist writers or leftists are born by the inner contradictions within the Western societies. Because we have had inequality, we talked about that. We have had elites which were disregarding the interests of the masses. We had minority elites which were imposing their values on the majorities, even in Europe, not speaking about the overall overwhelming majorities all over the world. So, I mean, populists and Trump are natural, I would say, defensive mechanisms of an ailing body to toxins.
We have all this madness that Putin is doing. Putin is nothing but a clown. Those dictators this is who they are. They're just bullies. And the West somehow lost their balls somewhere in the past 50 years while they were partying after the collapse of the Soviet Union and after the defeat of Nazis, while Nazis and communists were working on their comeback. And they have succeeded. I hate to bring the bad news, but the party is over. The party is over. Democracies are under attack. And if you don't fight for democracy, you don't actually deserve it.
Nathan, having listened to Sergey and Kassem, I mean, what sort of lessons do you draw for your democracy movement now?
I think for a lot of freedom fighters, we have a belief that democracy, of course, is not perfect. But as if it unfolds, the thing that we are doing should be refining it, enhancing it, instead of abandoning it and embrace authoritarianism. In Hong Kong, we are standing in the forefront of the clash of authoritarian and liberal values. And if the communism prevails this time, it could symbolize another fallout of liberal democracy. And that's what we are afraid of.
Thank you very much, and I wish we had more time.